This is producer Wes. Alright, thanks.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Us with heroic debates. I've got Elliot moderating, James Winter, Greg Rogers debating, and thank you, MathPig, for producing this thing. That's it.
Woo! Awesome, everybody. We are here for the first live debate on Heroic Debates. I am super duper excited. I'm going to be moderating today. I'm Secular Rarity, and we have with us today from the Christian perspective, Greg Rogers. Thank you so much for being here, Greg. And then from the atheist perspective, James Winter. This is just awesome, you guys. I'm really, really excited for this. And this is a good topic. So is God good? Pretty simple topic, but maybe not. We've got about an hour to kind of hash it out. So the way that we're gonna do this debate today, pretty simple. We're gonna give each debater a 5-minute opening, and then go into kind of a moderated discussion for the next hour. Basically with rotating 15 minutes, where for 15 minutes Greg will kind of be driving the conversation, and then we'll switch over to James and just kind of back and forth. I don't expect me to have to jump in too much to disrupt the flow, but we'll see how spicy and heated it gets, you guys. But I think it's going to be a really, really good debate. And that's really about it for me. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Please, do all the things, like and subscribe, comment below, share it with your friends. All easy stuff, and it'll really help the channel grow. That's about it, and I guess we'll just jump right into it and start the timer at your first word, Greg.
Okay. Well, I guess obviously I'm taking it from the standpoint of a Christian and looking at it and saying, okay, is God good? And I presume normally when these kinds of discussions happen, what ends up happening is there are a litany of examples from the Bible that are given that are here's an example of something that God did that doesn't seem good. Here's a law that was written. Here is a doctrine or a creed or something that was set up that obviously would we would look and say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't sound good, either for us as individuals or for us as a community. And I think ultimately, a lot of that comes down to people's perspectives, what your presuppositions are, where do we align in terms of what you think is good and what you think is bad. And so I guess what it really speaks to is that good and bad are really relative terms, and a lot of that comes down to what do individuals or communities feel is good and right. I think then when you're talking about God, you're talking about someone then that is not something that's bound by our finiteness. In other words, as an omniscient being, he actually understands and knows things that we don't know, and understands what's going on behind the scenes of those events and scenarios that may be taking place that we don't know about. And so I guess sometimes the question comes down as we draw and say something is good or bad that God is doing. The question is, do we actually understand all of the circumstances that are taking place? And if we were to understand everything that, as God understood it, would we maybe define things a little bit differently? I think also when you look at just good and bad with God, actually good and bad is not the thing that's at play with God. God doesn't look at people and say, hey, this person's good, this person's bad. What he looks at and says, hey, here's my nature, and my nature is the standard for which things are judged in terms of their ability to be compatible with me or not compatible with me. And so it really comes down to an issue not of good or bad with God. It comes down to, are you compatible with his nature or not compatible with his nature? And you can do something that's very good and not be compatible with God's nature, because perfection is something that we really don't completely understand. So I would say any debate that deals with God and asks if he's a moral monster may be dealing with things related to God that are on human terms, rather than looking at God and saying, hey, wait a minute, do I understand the nature of God and all that he's about? Maybe if I did understand more about it, I might think differently about it. So I guess that's my opening.
Awesome. A little bit of time on the clock, but that's okay because we'll just have more time for open discussion. So
Sounds
thank you
good.
so much, Greg, for your opening. We'll go over to you, James, and then we'll go into a moderated open discussion. So we'll start the clock on your first word, James.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me on here, first of all. Thank you, Greg, for joining me, and Secular Rarity and Wes, and everybody who's doing the moderating and everything behind the scenes. I wanted to start out, actually. I actually prepared a little bit longer of an opening statement than Greg had. I want to start off actually by reading a scripture at Matthew 5:17 and 18. And I'm using an online version of the Bible from the King James Version here. And it says, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle it shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. So what I'm going to do, like what Greg said, is I am going to be using the Bible to show examples of why I don't think God is good or a moral being. And before I get into the examples, though, I did have one question I wanted to pose, because we have examples in history where people have committed extreme acts that most any person would consider immoral. We have people like Hitler, Stalin, Bundy, Dahmer, just to name a few examples. And we consider these people morally reprehensible, and we do not excuse their behavior, but rather we look for ways to bring them to justice, even though we know it doesn't always happen. So my question is, why do Christians look to excuse behavior by their God that is immoral and worse than people that I just mentioned above, while at the same time looking for justice against people that have done the same things? Now, while I have many examples I can think about, I'm only going to talk about a few. I'm going to use examples from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so the first example that I have that I want to start off with is what, in my opinion, actually, is probably the most egregious act that God could have ever done. Now, according to what I understand from Christian theology, most Christians believe that God is all-knowing and all-powerful. So my first example based off of that is when God created Adam and Eve. So if he is all-knowing, he would have known that they would have eaten of the fruit, and caused the original sin. If he is all powerful, he would have been able to make them in a way where they wouldn't have eaten from the fruit and still not violate whatever free will is in their theology. So the implication is that because of the way that he did create humans from the very beginning and being all knowing and all powerful, that every human that has ever died in history, starting with Adam and Eve, would be directly God's fault, because he would have known from the beginning what he was doing. And then at the same time, set up a system where the idea of being saved and getting a reward is by means of an overly elaborate and slow moving process through millennia. And then the only way to be part of that reward is to find a religion that started thousands of years later and at its start wasn't winning over converts by love and acceptance, but rather through fear and death. Now I'm going to move on to my second example here. And I know this is one that atheists use a lot. I see some clipping on my mic. Let me adjust this real quick. See if that makes it any better. All right. And for this one, we go to Exodus 21. And I'm sure everybody's going, oh, I know what that is. And yes, slavery, exactly. And Exodus 21, God lays out how to purchase, treat, and trick people into slavery. For example, verses 4 and 5, while people can own slaves from their own people, there's a way to trick them into staying if they have a wife and kids and don't want to leave their families. When they leave, it is to be by themselves, and the wife and kids have to stay. But if that slave wants to stay with his wife and kids, he will then continue to remain as a slave. In modern times, we call that emotional blackmail, which, I've had experience in this, is a characteristic of a cult. And then verse 21 gets worse when it says that you can beat a slave, and if he doesn't die in a day or two, then there is no punishment for his master. As mentioned at the opening, even Jesus didn't come to change the rules on it. Slaves were treated as disposable people. Mark 12, 1-12 shows that this is the case when Jesus gave a parable about lending out a vineyard. And when he went to get paid for it, he sent many slaves, and a lot of them were beaten and killed. He said this in a manner of...
We have just hit the time for the opening. If you want to finish the thought in like 10 seconds, you can go ahead if you want.
Okay, I'll just finish this up.
Yeah.
Where was I at?
I
Okay,
give my time, the balance of my time.
Okay. Sweet.
And he said it in a manner of it being normal, and didn't instead say, hey, slavery's fucked up, guys, don't do it. So I'll just jump down to my concluding remarks on this, because I had something else to say too. I just want to say that this was just a few examples, and I do have more, obviously, because I'm not reading them all. But I believe that the God of the Bible is not moral based off what people believe to be his written word and an accounting of his own actions. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And thank you for your opening, James. We appreciate you. Before we go into our moderated discussion, which again is going to be kind of a 15-minute back and forth, where we'll start off with Greg kind of being in charge of that conversation. Greg, if you kind of want to jump in a little bit and say, hey, maybe you're not answering the question exactly, we'll flip over to James, and he'll be able to kind of ask some questions or lay out some points to have you respond to. For everybody out there watching and hanging with us, thank you so much. Of course, make sure to go check out the description to find all the great stuff that James and Greg do when they're not on this wonderful channel. So their links are down there, as well as a link to the after party at the end of this debate. We are going to be hanging out over in the pigsty with MathPig. So definitely make sure you come hang out with us. But enough of me. Nobody's here to hear me talk. So we are gonna start the open conversation. And Greg, you have the first 15 minutes to kind of drive, like I said, and then
Yeah.
we will. I'll just jump in the next 15 minutes and say, all right, James, it's to you. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
You bet. Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately, and I feel this way really truthfully. I think it is incumbent upon the Christian to be able to answer those questions. Um, I think if there is a God, then everything you have brought up is legit. He is either who he says he is or he's not. In which case, if he's not, then we shouldn't worship him. So I guess what the best thing to do is just kind of take your questions, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. I know I'm a person, so I'm just doing the best I know how. But I would start, I guess, with your one about Adam and Eve and God creating people knowing in his knowledge and his omniscience that they're going to fall. If they're going to fall, that does sound pretty contradictory. I mean, if he's a perfect God, then he's supposed to be perfectly loving, supposed to be perfectly content. He's supposed to be perfect in every way. So he doesn't need anything these people are going to have to offer if he really is perfect. And for him to create these beings and then say, hey, I know in advance that they're going to screw up and they're going to end up with a threat of hell. I agree with you. It sounds screwed up from the standpoint of him. If he's really saying that he's perfectly loving, that doesn't sound perfectly loving or perfectly compassionate at all. And so I do think it requires a little bit of thought and probably going back and looking and seeing, okay, what really is transpiring. I think number one, when you talk about Adam and Eve, you got to remember that Adam and Eve weren't the first ones that were created with a will of their own. It didn't start there. At least biblically, it started with the creation of the angels. So if you're going to really ask this question, you ought to go backwards and say, hey, wait a minute, why would a perfect God, who's a God who's perfect in every way and omniscient, create anything that has a will of its own, starting with the first ones that did, the angels? And if you really do walk that through, I think what you end up coming to a conclusion is the only thing that makes sense is that God would be compelled to do it. Because if not, how in the world could a loving God do this when he knows that a third of the angels are going to rise up against him and are going to rebel against him, and now a third of the angels are going to go to hell? That's even worse than one or two people, right?
But let me ask you something on that, Greg,
Yeah.
because couple problems I see with what you're saying here, with the angels being created first and having a will of their own. Okay, so what's the difference? And this is a question nobody I've ever in my background haven't gotten answered. Okay. What's the difference between an angel that exercises his own free will or his own thought, his own whatever he wants to do, versus a human? And the only answer I've seen is the human has to grow old and die, whereas the angel still gets to live on forever to an unexplained amount of time later, whereas humans don't. So like the system of fairness is definitely skewed in a very large way.
Yeah, in large part is skewed against the angels.
How's it skewed against the angels? It's more skewed against humans because we die after less than 100 years and angels still living on for millennia.
Exactly. So if you're an angel and the wages of sin is death, for you rebelling against God is death. And the only death that you can die is an eternal one because you're a spirit being. But yet when God creates humans, they're capable of dying in a finite way. So God can say in perfect justness, hey, I've carried out justice against your sin. You've died, but now your soul is still alive. And your soul is now, if you've placed your trust in what Christ did on the cross, actually is in a position where it is represented by someone else now. And you're in a state where you're starting over. You actually are in a state where you're not at odds with God anymore. It is a blessing that you can physically die, because from the perspective of a perfect God, he can be perfectly just and now give grace and mercy to you without that being something that's not just.
But how does an angel die? Like, what do you mean by an angel dying exactly?
Great question. For a spirit being to die, the way that a spirit being dies is to actually be separated from the one who is the giver of life. At least is the way that God explains it in His Word. They're cast into the lake of fire, and they're left there in a state where they are separated from God for all of eternity. So eternal death is the death to fear, not physical death. Physical death is actually a blessing when you're looking about things from an eternal perspective.
So let me get some clarification on this. So
Yeah.
they're still technically alive, right?
Yes.
These angels.
Yeah, because a spirit being, a spirit, you live. Yeah, the spirit being is an eternal thing. Yes.
So how are you dead if you're still technically alive?
Well, because
it'd be like me, like if I, like my dad, okay?
Yeah.
I don't get to see my dad right now. He lives in another state, 10 hours away from me. So I'm separated from my dad, but I'm not in any kind of agony or anything over it. I can still call him and whatnot, but like I'm still alive, but I'm not dead though either. So like
yeah,
how do you wrap your mind around that? How do you overcome that obstacle in your mind?
I guess the way I would look at it and answer that is the one who gave us the definition is the one who defines what that is. He says the second death is basically to be separated from Him from eternity. He just calls that the second death, and I'm assuming he means that from the standpoint of if He's the giver of all good things, which is what he he defines and says that He is, then if I am separated from the giver of all good things, then it would be like death. I mean, it would be all I could experience was all the worst in life, or all the worst that there is in existence in separation from Him, and that's what he's describing. He uses the term death because that's a term that he hopes that we might be able to connect with. But what he's describing is there's two deaths. One is physical death. The other is separation from Him for eternity. So I guess my question, if I were to redirect and say, okay, you had asked about this from the standpoint of, is this a moral thing? And is this a necessarily good? If the issue is really about dealing with God and He's perfect, and anything that is imperfect is going to experience something that is to be separated for Him for all eternity. If He did actions throughout time that were in a way to try to create a way and make possible for the most people possible to be able to forego what it meant to experience separation from Him for all eternity. And in some cases, those things look like they're bad. Let's say you brought up the example of, hey, wait about, He said to kill all the Amalekites. He said to kill all the Canaanites. That was probably on your list. If He said to do those kinds of things, and yet by doing that, it protected the ability for the remedy to be available to everyone, would you not say that would be like your Hitler situation where you said, hey, wait a minute, God was stepping in justice and actually taking those out that would cost the life of everyone else? Because I think you've got it flip-flopped. God's not Hitler. God's the Nuremberg trial.
Yeah, but like actually that example wasn't actually on my list, believe it or not.
It's a good one, isn't it?
It is a good one. But in that example though, He said also to kill all the women and children. So that would be like if you went back to Germany in World War II, you, instead of just killing Hitler and stopping him, that would be like killing everybody who's a German, even if they didn't want to be a part of the war.
Right. And that's where you go back to, okay, wait a minute, God's an omniscient God. We're not. He very rarely said wipe everyone out. He only did it twice, to my knowledge. And in both cases, when the people did not do what He said, those people actually came back and rose up against Israel and caused them to walk away from God. If through these people, the Israelites, was the pathway to get to the Messiah, And the Messiah was not just to save the people of Israel, but to save the entire world from an eternal separation from God. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites are actually a threat to that, and he knows that. Then it would actually be unloving of him if he were to say, hey, let them all live, because now it's a threat to all of existence that they would end up in hell. I would say that he's making actually the more compassionate, the better decision, the wiser decision. And it's because he's omniscient. We're not.
But still, to me, that just sounds like you're justifying genocide. And because you think about it, if those kids, just say you only spared the kids. I'm not saying I agree with this either,
Yeah.
okay? But just say you just spared the kids in this situation, right?
Yes.
We know that if you take children and you educate them and you show them, ways of other cultures and get them to understand the world around them better, that they're going to be better people for it in the future.
Okay, so now
even
you just okay. Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Even if you just did that, you could have saved a whole lot of lives and taught them to be better than what their forefathers were.
Okay, so those children were all in a cult, right? And so they've been brainwashed into a certain mindset and way of thinking. You know about this, right? Okay.
I do, and I came out of it too.
Exactly. And now, what often happens
change even as an adult.
Exactly. And so, what oftentimes has to happen with children, police go in and they actually take those children away from the cult and they take them over to a different situation forcibly, because they have to get them away from the brainwashing. Now you just described what God did in many cases when he said, don't wipe them all out, but take these portions of that culture and bring them in, and they are going to be your slaves. They are now in the tutelage of a people who actually have a right relationship with God and can be redirected towards what they need to do.
So are you allowed to justify him saying kill all the women and children in this situation just because he doesn't do it in this other situation?
Again, he's an omniscient God. And what I said, the way you keep going back to it is saying he's killing all these children because in some way they are innocent. What God is looking at and saying is in the future, he understands what those children are going to grow up and do. And he understands better what's going to happen through that process. And in fact, if you look at both those situations, the children did grow up and do exactly what God said that they would do. They would lead the children of Israel away from him, and they would cause great destruction among their people and other peoples. So was God justified then? And all the question is the timing of it. So if you could catch Hitler as a baby and you understood that Hitler was going to go on and do the Holocaust and all of that, and there was no way to transform his mind, he was going to carry out that no matter what, would you be justified in saying, hey, maybe this one, if we could cast a judgment on him now, we could do that? As a human, absolutely not. You can't do that. Why? Because you're not omniscient. If you're God, you are omniscient. And he is heading off greater destruction by what he's doing.
But see, then to flip that on you a little bit, though, like if you go to the example of the Exodus account where God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. So he purposely hardened Pharaoh's heart to do what he wanted him to do. And then so that way he could go ahead and do his miracles, if you want to call them, or, up to killing all the firstborn of Egypt. So now God made the situation be that way. Couldn't he have also, if he has all this power and everything, flipped that script and with these kids say, hey, you know what? I'm going to let you guys change as you grow up so you don't turn out to be this way and you still be a better society.
I think he does that. He does that when he takes some of the folks and makes them either, whether they're slaves, or some people actually would define it as they were actually slaves. The language actually used could be that they were actually integrated into the families themselves. And so, and in some situations, it may have been a slavery thing, like police coming in and saying, we're forcibly taking you out. In other instances, it could have been when allowed or when the people would go for it. they would be integrated into the family. God is not giving one recipe and saying, this is the way I'm doing it. In his omniscience, he's using what's necessary in each of the situations. Why? Because he wants that none would perish, but that all would have eternal life. He is actually fighting for every single person. And the problem is in our humanity, we don't understand that, because we see through the lens of our justness, and sometimes also through the lens of our hurt and our experience. And
Well,
we wonder, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's a good moment for me to just jump in and say, all right, we're passing the torch over to James for the next 15 minutes to kind of lead. But again, remember, you guys, this is just an open conversation, but whoever is leading for that 15 minutes, if you want to refocus the conversation or ask questions or whatever, it's kind of your time to go. But again, I'll shut up and just let you get back into it, James.
All right. Well, so I wrote down a couple notes while you were giving your opening here, and you, in your opening comments, you mentioned that good and bad are relative. Now, and I to a point, I get that, okay? But if you're looking to God for your ultimate morality and everything, and like I asked earlier, well, how can we justify these acts that were written down by God in his word? And yes, I'm just giving that to you. I'm not even trying to argue that part with you at all. So like other shows that we'll see. But like, if you're going by just that though, how can, if we know that genocide and murder and rape and all these things are just absolute, horrible things to do in society, then how can God's morality be relative if we know that these things are bad and we shouldn't do them at all ourselves?
Great question. I mean, ultimately, good and bad are relative when you're talking about us, or when people are basing it on arbitrariness, what my feelings are. And if God was basing it on his feelings, it would be relative. The standard that God upholds and what he puts out there and says, this is what is good, this is what is bad, or what have you. And again, I think those are the wrong terms. I think it's actually, is it perfect or is it imperfect? Aligned to his standard of his essence is that God is something. It's not that he feels like something. It's not that he arbitrarily decides that he likes this thing better or something along those lines. It's that his nature is this way. And therefore, to be able to relate to him, you have to be compatible with that nature. So, but back to the point about the relativity and genocide and all of those kinds of things. I think you have to look at it from what's your set of presuppositions about where God is coming from. If you come at it and you look at it and you say, well, God is obviously bad because he's done these things, then you've put God in a position where you're saying, hey, justify to me why these things are actually good, right?
And he absolutely should do that.
That's what
he
you
absolutely should do that.
Absolutely.
He should do that.
He
should tell us why he should tell us why genocide is okay. He should tell us why slavery is okay. He should tell us why rape and incest are okay, because all these things are in his word.
In his word.
And he's okay with them.
Exactly.
He doesn't say don't do them.
No, I agree.
And that's why I ask these questions, because we say we know that these things are bad. If you go and try to do these things outside the walls of your home,
yes,
and you get caught, you're gonna get in prison and get long sentences. And we know these things are not good. They're not healthy for society. They're not healthy for your emotional state or anything. And we know these things because of science and research we have behind the impact that these things have on society. And yet God says it's okay, but because you're on the side that God is moral and good, mm-hmm. So you're taking that presupposition that because it's God, it's okay.
So in which case I should have to go into the Bible, or I'd have to go into the Message and see, okay, wait a minute. whether it's historical facts about what transpired in those situations or what God wrote about in his word or what have you, and see God actually give us a reason for why he did those things. So you're exactly right. Either God has got to justify himself, or I need to look at those stories and say, hey, wait a minute, if God really is who he says he is, which is perfectly good, let me make sure I understand the nature of what's actually being told in those stories and make sure I understand what is transpiring in those stories. Because it could be that my understanding of what's happening in those stories is wrong. And I can give you an example of that if you want to hear an example.
I'll have you do that in just a second. I just want to say I'm okay with knowing the reasons behind it.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you read the Bible, you don't get those reasons. You have this is what it is, and history is it can get very hard to search through and find stuff that would actually be factual relating to those stories. So really, all you got to go by is the Bible. And
there's a lot of archaeological evidence too.
I know there is,
okay.
But still, it doesn't give you the full picture of everything either.
That's true, and I think that's the reason why basically all of us are taking a step of faith. We say we know things, we actually believe things. So right now, you're in a position where you believe that God is a genocidal maniac, I guess, and I would say, hey, wait a minute. If we go back and look at those stories, I think you'll actually see that he's more the judge in charge of the Nuremberg trial.
So, but I actually kind of want to switch gears here a little bit because I'm trying to keep up my time and everything. So, let me ask you a question. If I could, just a simple yes or no, please. Did God create hell?
Did God create hell? It's a hard. I would say I will say yes for the purposes of what you're thinking. Although I don't know that to say that he made it is actually the right terminology.
But
because if it's the absence of him, if he places you where he is not present, then it is a state of being that actually is what occurs when you're not in his presence.
Well, even by your definition, he still created that place, though. If he's the creator of everything, he ultimately created it, right?
Right.
Whether you believe it's
and that's why I said yes.
Absence,
and that's why I said yes.
Believe it's a torture chamber where you got straws being shot through your nails or something like that.
Right. And that's why I said yes. That's why I said yes. I think for the terms that you're using, I think the answer is yes.
Right. So God creates this state or hell, whatever you want to define it as, knowing that he's going to send people there or other angels there. So again, why, if he's moral, if he's, just and everything, why it's like to me that's like creating a prison for a child just born and you don't know what they're going to do. But you're anticipating that child to screw up. But yet in this case, though, he knows the child's going to screw up. So he creates him many ways to be that way, lets him be that way, and then punishes him for how he creates them.
That's a great question. I spent 3 years thinking about that question, just to let you know. Unfortunately, it's about a 30-minute answer. I would give a shameless plug and say that's what my first book's about, Created the Devil's Apprentice. It actually dives down into that question. I think ultimately where you end up falling is the only way that you can justify it, or that God could justify it, is that he's compelled to do it. And then the next question should be, wait a minute, how could God be compelled by something if he's God? Because then that other thing would be God. The answer to that question is that he's compelled from within. It's by his nature that he's compelled to do it. And it's the core of his nature. It's his perfection that does it. And the reason why he's compelled
to send people to hell, knowing he's supposed to send them to hell.
He's compelled to create them, even though he knows that a third of them will end up going to hell. But so you have to ask what could be so compelling to a perfect God. That's the next question. And the only thing that would be compelling is if he could, the only thing that would be that valuable to him would be if he could have more of himself. And if he couldn't have more of himself, if he could have more of himself, and yet for some reason there were things that he didn't want to do, like create the angels because they're going to end up in hell, and he doesn't want to do that because he's a perfectly loving God, it would be that, hey, if I don't do this as God, I myself could become imperfectly discontent, in which case I would end up in my own version of hell. So then you'd have to ask, then how is that justified? And the way is that he would create a plan that would allow everyone to have an out along with himself. How far would God go to maintain his own perfection and yet save everyone else? He'd go all the way to the cross.
You mean like what I said in my opening comments, the overly elaborate, slowly moving plan? Yeah, I took that line from Austin Powers movie.
Oh, okay.
but that's what it looks like, though. It's an overly elaborate, slowly moving plan that has so much vagueness to it that if he really wants to save everybody, really has this desire to save everybody, then why are there atheists? Why are there people that are Muslims and Hindus and every other religion in the world that, isn't the Christian religion?
Yeah.
If he wants everybody to be saved, and Christians aren't the largest religion in the world even. So why would it be not even the biggest group on earth that is the right way?
Small is the road that leads to life, and few will find it. But broad is the
But he wants everybody to find it, though.
He
So
wants
why not
everyone
make
to
it
find
easier?
it. So you have to go back and say, okay, if God was compelled, what was the way that he would actually be able to know himself better? Why would you create something for the purpose of, the angels to worship? The Bible says that God can inhabit the praises of Israel. He can inhabit the praises of a created being that has his own will. If he can inhabit that, then he can know himself in a way that he couldn't know himself before. If he knows he can know himself in that way and yet doesn't create the situation that would do it, he would have to be able to be content with that situation. And what God said is he's such a great treasure that he even can't be content if he knows he could know himself better.
Earlier you said, though, that my thought just escaped me. In the Bible earlier you said that in the Bible that God puts words in so we can understand, such as death. Your version of saying death was, a separation, but you said he uses words we can understand, right?
Yes.
So why doesn't he make the system for that salvation easier for everybody to understand? Still, in his knowledge and power and everything, he could still create it where you have that free will, you have the decision, the choice is yours.
Yeah.
But yet we don't have that system. We have a system where it's very hard, very difficult, so abstract, so obscure that it takes a great leap of faith to
So let me see if I can lay it out. Let me see if I can lay it out, and if it sounds simple enough to you. God has a good, perfect, and pleasing will. He's perfect, therefore, right? And if you're going to worship him, and he creates you for the purpose of worshiping him, that means you have to freely be able to worship him, which means he has to give you your own identity, your own will. Okay, if he gives you your own will so that you can be who you are, anyone who has their own will eventually choose their will over the will of another. It's the definition of actually having your own will. But if you choose your own will, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Why? Because if I choose my will and it's different than God's will, even if it's to do really super good things, if it's different than him, it's imperfect, and now you're incompatible with him. Now you're on a pathway that leads you to a place that you don't want to go. So here's what God said. Hey, look, you can't make yourself perfect again. Guess what? I'll do what it takes to make you perfect. Here's what I'll do. I'll pay the penalty for you. You say you want it. If you'll accept it and mean it, I'll give it to you. It's free. You don't have to do anything to earn it or deserve it. Is that pretty simple enough?
There's one other major flaw with that. And I'm a parent, and this is where I see the major flaw in this as well.
Yes.
My kids see me every day.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen God. So
Do you know
with
if you're
that being
perfect?
said,
Do you know if you're perfect?
no, I know I'm not perfect.
So you know you're
But that's
incompatible with God. That's all you
but
need
see,
to know.
I also know that my dad isn't perfect either because I've seen him. I can't know if a God is perfect because I've never seen him or met him. So that's a big difference right there. So
I get.
we got less than a minute left in this part, but just to sum up though, like if I can't ever know that God is there, I can't know whether he's perfect or not. And I'll send it back to secular rarity now.
Yeah, perfect timing once again, you guys. And we'll just kick it right back over to Greg for your last 15 minutes, and then we'll come back to you, James. Just want to let everybody know out there hanging with us, if you have any questions, feel free to tag Heroic Debates or MathPig, and just let us know what your question is or who the question is directed to, any relevant points and so forth. So we'll definitely be looking for those because we've got that at the end. And of course, just remember, if you guys are enjoying this and you're having a good time, just hit the like, subscribe, notification bell. You guys know the drill. But back to you, Greg, and for your last 15 minutes.
Yeah, I guess before we got on, Wes and I were talking, and I mentioned something to him. Truthfully, all of this stuff really comes down to, is there a God or is there not? And because we can talk about this all day long and whether or not God's good or God's not. And really what it comes down to is there's a bunch of us that say that we have met God and we do have a relationship with him. And we try to describe that to people. And sometimes it's really hard because, yeah, you're right, I don't see him. But I am convinced that I relate to him. And so the question then becomes, is that a reality or is it not? If it is a reality, then the question then becomes, why have you not experienced that same thing? I don't know. Because and that's part of why they say that Christianity or a relationship with God is a personal thing. All of us are I don't know what the trigger is that will get you to a point where you'll say, hey, wait a minute, I have actually sensed and believe I am relating to God. Ultimately, it is a step of faith. God left it there. And I think part of that is because what God is looking for is people whose hearts are perfectly his, he says. He's looking for people who actually say that their greatest desire is, even if I didn't have any evidence whatsoever, I would want you so desperately that I would seek you in that way. And he says, if you seek me, you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. There's the rich young ruler who came before Jesus and he said, hey, I want to follow you. What is it that I must do to follow you? And he says, take all that you own, go and sell it and give it to the poor. And then you can do that. Then you can follow me. And it says the man walked away in sorrow, even though he said that he had kept all the 10 commandments. He did all the religious stuff. He did everything that everyone had told him it took to have a relationship with God. And what he found out was that he wasn't keeping the first commandment, to have no God before me. His money, I guess so. I mean, I would just, all I would say is that he was proving that he actually longed for something more than God first.
Well, let me ask you a question on that, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So what about all the people who have tried to seek him, have sincerely, there's plenty of atheists out here who, hey, in our deconversion from religion, whether Christianity or whatever, we did seek, we did look, we sincerely and honestly wanted to know, is there God? Fine, come tell me, let me know. But yet we never got that. So what is that? Why didn't we? And we were sincere about it. Why didn't we find him?
So I'm sitting here right in front of you right now, and I'm saying there's a different way to approach God than the way you did. I think you came through the Jehovah's Witnesses and maybe some other things as well. I'm saying there's a different way to do it. Is it possible that right now God is speaking through me to you and saying, I'm crying out to you. I'm crying out to you. And if you really want to know me, Greg's one that can tell you how to know me.
So are you telling me that the way I was seeking is the wrong way?
I'm saying that the road that you took actually brought you to a place where now you're on a radio station that if you had thought that you found them in Jehovah's Witnesses, you might never have gotten on this radio station and may never be talking to me right now and having me say there's a different way. So yes, God may have said, I'm going to let him go through all of that in order to get on a radio program as an atheist so he can hear from someone who actually does know me and actually hear what it takes, which is here I am. You're not perfect. God says, I love you so much that when my love for you, I will provide what my holiness demands. I'll die for you. There you go. And all you have to do is say, God, will you make that remedy apply to me? And if you say it and mean it, he says, right then you move from death to life. It's done. That's it. Simple.
I like the little comment in the private chat here. Greg showing his age on the radio station comment instead of YouTube channel.
Oh, I may.
I just thought that was funny.
I'm 52. I'm 52 and an old fart, and probably still, if I text, I probably sign it at the end. So yeah, I get it.
I just thought that was a funny comment. But going back to that though, like so. But why would? Here's what I think of. Like so. God wants to save you from all this.
Yes.
Yet I look at it like this. Okay. Children have their own free will too, right?
Yes.
So said child goes out into the middle of the street. A car's coming. Do you stop? Do you just stand there and watch the kid get hit by a car because that was his free will to go out in the street? Or do you go in and save that kid, thus taking away his free will from being in that street?
I mean,
as a parent, I have no
that's an
hesitation.
easy question. I have no hesitation either. I jump out and save the kid.
So,
but we're not.
Why?
God. And God's not saving us from a car that's coming. He's saving us from a problem that is that my essence is not equal to his essence.
But that's the whole point, though. It's just a small way of showing the larger scale. Because if he has the power and the knowledge of what everybody's going to do in their lives,
yes, throughout
all eternity and everything, why didn't he just step in and save everybody from it, period, rather than making them suffer? Now let's put it. Say the kid gets hit by the car and doesn't die.
Yeah.
Let's say the kid gets hit by the car and doesn't die. He's in the hospital for a long time.
Yeah.
And now this kid, now he knows, hey, I know I shouldn't go out in the middle of the street. I'm going to get hit by a car.
Yeah.
But as a parent, why let him go through all that just to teach him a lesson not to run out in the street?
Remember, I said there was a reason why God created anything that had a will of its own, and it was because God understood that he was being compelled by his nature because of himself actually being in a state where he could end up in hell. What he did was create a system that made it so no one had to go to hell, including himself. And it's on the basis of a free will decision. And it's an easy one. Yeah. It's basically, will you accept that I died in your place? It's not that the guy jumped out in front of the car to save the kid. It's that the guy jumped out in front of the car, pushed the kid out of the way, and took the car. He died to save the kid. That's what God did.
Yeah, but then there's that scripture, though. I can't remember where it was at, where it says God doesn't desire any to be destroyed.
Yeah, but that all would have eternal
desires
life.
all to.
And he doesn't.
It's different from the JW Bible to other Bibles, but that's how I remember it.
That's right.
But if he doesn't desire any to be destroyed, he has the power for everybody to not be destroyed.
Yes.
It'd be like if I desire to go buy up Walmart and I have the money to do it and the power to do it, I can just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But like he doesn't do it though. He allows people to still die and be in your whatever version of hell you believe in, even though he doesn't desire that, but he still lets it happen. If he truly loves you and everything, why does he still let that happen? I just can't wrap my head around it.
Because in order for you to be able to worship, which was part of what was saving him, is that you had to have the free will to be able to choose to worship him. In order to do that, you have to have your own identity, your own will. The problem what you're running into is the great conflict that happens with free will and omniscience and omnipotence and all those things that God is. For God to allow us to have free will, it means the only way he's able to do that is because he's omnipotent. If not, there's no way he could allow us to even have our own identity and do all that, because it would contradict himself. I understand it's difficult, because you look there, because the place you could take it is to say, hey, wait a minute. God says he's compelled to do it. He's actually trying to save himself. This is a selfish act. He's saving himself. And by doing that, he's creating these beings because he's compelled to do so. If not, he's going to go into his version of hell. But then he creates a way that will save them all and allow them not to have to experience hell. Oh, wait a minute. Then it flips back. It's this back and forth. The problem is that the problem and the solution are inseparable.
So if that's inseparable,
yeah,
then God isn't all powerful enough to create his own world where he can't save himself then, unless he does this. So see the contradiction there too?
Yeah,
so,
I'm fine with it. What you've heard is Christians that say, hey, he's omnipotent, he's all these different things. What God ran into was a problem. And the problem was that in order for him to be able to maintain his own perfect contentment, he had to create a being that had a free will choice. And when they did that, he knew that they were going to be in a situation themselves. He ran into a problem where his internal want, he had no internal needs. His internal want became a need. You're exactly right.
So you're saying God has a problem that he can't solve then?
No, he can solve it. And he did solve it. The question is, in his solution, will we accept his solution, which actually becomes the remedy for us as well? We are choosing not to accept the remedy. He's got one way to save himself and to save us all. He just says, if you will accept me as the remedy and that I will die in your place, and you'll just say you'll accept that and want me to do that for you, he says, you don't have to face any of it. But if not, yes, you run into a problem because you didn't accept the one remedy. It's not his problem.
Condemned billions of people to hell and
by
angels
their choice.
And all that. So
by their choice.
His solution still isn't perfect.
No, it's perfect.
Contradicts his being.
It's perfect. It's imperfectly applied by us because it perfectly can save you. All you have to do is say, yes, I want it to be. Will you make it apply to me?
It can't be perfect though, because if it was
it can be right now if you'll say, yes, God, will you make it apply to me?
We could perfectly understand it. He could make us understand it in a way where we would understand it without a doubt.
Yeah.
But being that there's people out there that don't, it's not perfect.
Can you understand that you're not perfect?
Yeah, I can.
Can you understand that if he is perfect and you're not perfect, you're not compatible with him?
No, because I've never seen a perfect being.
Okay, so he tells you, okay, you're right. I can't define perfection to you because there's no way to define it. So I give you a list of laws, and I say, hey, if you fail in one point of the law, you failed at all. Is there any
list of laws that include the slavery and how to treat them and beat them and everything?
Yeah, I guess you can go there.
And that's perfect.
Well, if you look at what slavery is about, what God is actually telling us through slavery is that, do you know what what really is he does? He, throughout the history of the Bible, if you follow it and track it all the way through, it's because the people weren't willing to turn away from slavery without turning away from him. So he gives them a set of laws originally that say, yeah, slavery, but treat them better than everyone else does. And as you see him titrate his people over to what his real feelings are about slavery, you go to the book of, was it Jude or I think it's Jude. It's probably a different one. And he shows a slave that's returning to his master, and he says, hey, slave master, slave, guess what? I led both of you to Christ. In Christ, neither of you are slave or master. Guess what? You're both slaves to sin. What you ought to be doing is treating each other as brothers. That's where he was leading everyone. But he couldn't get anyone there until they came through recognizing that all of us are a slave to something. We're a slave either to our sin, to our own self and our own desires, or we're a slave to his good, perfect, and pleasing will. You're a slave to something no matter what.
Well, we probably have about 30 seconds left technically, maybe just a little bit more, but I figured, again, that was probably a good place for us to just go ahead and hand the torch back over to James for the final 15 minutes here. Remember, everybody out there hanging with us, either live now or in the future, go and check out what Greg and James do. Their links are in the description. I know we put them in the comments as well. And then definitely, if you're here with us live, come and hang out with us on the after show over with MathPig. So, James, we'll kick it over to you for the last 15 minutes of the open conversation.
Okay. I say we can hash out this slavery topic a little bit more.
Okay.
Because even whether you think God was justified using it or not, when you look at the Bible from both the Old Testament even to the New Testament, there is not one word in there that says to abolish slavery in any way. It doesn't, the Old Testament tells you how to procure them, treat them, etc. The New Testament, it doesn't talk about that part, but it talks about parts of, in parts how slaves are still treated, how they're still around, rather than just saying, hey, you know what, we shouldn't own other people, because that in itself would be a violation of their free will to own them. So God gives free will, but he also tells people that it's okay to have slaves, which in essence violates their free will, because now those people can't do what they want to do of their own volition. Mm-hmm. So how is that also not a contradiction in itself?
First of all, again, as I explained, if slavery is a state that's going to exist regardless of what God does, from the standpoint of either you're going to be a slave to his good, perfect, and pleasing will, or you're going to be a slave to sin itself, there's no way to abolish slavery. Now, I know, and I'm talking in a spiritual sense. Now, let me do what you're talking about, which is to take it down to a human sense, because that's what you're really talking about is, hey, how could he let people be slaves to other people and that kind of a thing? And you said that he never says to abolish slavery. No, he didn't come out and say the words don't abolish slavery. What he said was, as you track it through from the Old Testament into the writings of Paul over into the writings, I think it's in Jude again, I can't remember exactly. But what he writes about is that he is slowly moving people from a state where they will not give up slavery because that's what they want, to one where he says that there's no slave, there's no free, there's no master, there's none of that stuff. What there are is either saved or not saved, and where you end up is in a place where everyone should be looking and saying, this is my brother, this is my sister, this is not a slave or master situation. So he gives you where he's trying to lead you to, and he definitely tells you that in the Bible. But what he also does is say, what's the remedy to slavery? It's the same remedy to every form of sin. It's that you've got to die. You have to, as a selfish being, a being that's imperfect and that thinks, how can I get more for myself than someone else has, which is what leads to slavery. He says that side of you has to die, and you have to live again as I am, good, perfect, and pleasing, where slavery is not an issue at all to begin with. There is no slave. That's why Thomas Jefferson, when he was writing, and he said, we find these truths to be self-evident that all men are created. He was a deist. He wasn't a Christian, but he recognized it, that all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. There should be no slave. And that was something that everyone should be able to recognize, because and he pulled directly from Scripture talking about that and saying, this is how I understand these things to be true. The problem is
Yeah, but-
that when we say that we're going to define what our source of happiness is, if you define your source of happiness as anything other than God, then what you have is the freedom to hang yourself and to not have life and have it more abundantly. The problem is we don't define things the way God does. And because of that, we end up in a place where we are outside of his good, perfect, and pleasing will. The wages of sin is death. That's what you end up with. And slavery is a form of death. You
Yeah,
want to
but
deal with the slave
you're-
issue? You deal with the problem of the human condition is the problem of the human heart. You've got to change the human
Yeah, but
heart.
you're still trading one form of slavery for another in your version here.
Yeah, I'm trading it.
You're
I'm
saying,
sorry, to God's good, perfect, and pleasing will. I am. And he makes no bones about it. He says there's going to be a situation that's that way. But he also says that my yoke is light. And why? Because what we find out is when we're a slave to his good, perfect, and pleasing will, all those things that we really desired and didn't even know that we desired, that's fulfilled in him. You just don't know it yet.
yeah, but like, why can't we just be happy and live full lives or whatever eternity afterwards without having to have God there? Why can't he just say, hey, you know what? I created you with free will. You don't have to follow me, but go ahead and be happy and, live without me. That's fine. I'll make sure it's all good for you still.
Because if
If
he's
he
the source
truly
of everything that's good,
loves and
perfect,
gives
and
you free
pleasing,
will.
if you are outside and separated from a relationship with him, what's going to be the source of that good, perfect, and pleasing? What's going to be the source of that if everything good comes from God?
But
Where are
he
you gonna
also can
find
make it where he can make, like I said, he can make it where you're everything good. Still, you could still have that if you're not with them in that relationship.
Ask that. I'm sorry, I was reading a question from MathPig. I'm sorry, I've got ADHD, so I can't do two things at once.
I completely know where you're coming from. I do too. So it's all good. And I haven't had my medicine yet today. So,
So why couldn't he
couldn't
create it that
God
way?
create it where you could be happy with or without him? Why couldn't, if he has all this power and omniscience and everything, why couldn't he just make it, hey, you know what? It's like, and again, I can only put it in terms I understand, okay?
Yeah.
I'm a human. I understand human terms. So my kids are going to eventually grow up and move out of my house.
Yes.
They're going to go live their lives, whether they go to college, whether they get married, have families of their own. They're going to eventually do that. So I don't need to have them find all their happiness and fulfillment in life by living with me.
Yeah.
Nor do I need to get all my happiness and fulfillment in life by keeping them with me at all times. I find happiness in watching them go out and learn on their own and explore and,
I get it.
go through the bumps and bruises of life, but still, get up and keep on moving and learn to find their own way.
Yeah.
So if I can do that as a human,
yeah.
Why couldn't God do that as a perfect omniscient being?
Well, I think you're recognizing part of the question that's there. I think you've got it flip-flopped though, from the standpoint of you're equating God with you. What you need to do is think of it in terms of God. If you were God, and you were the source of everything good, then the question is completely different than if I'm a father to my kid and I'm imperfect and I'm not the source of any of that stuff. Because for you to say, I want my son to go off and live his life and have it good and do it independent from me, that makes perfect sense for me with you and me, because neither of us are the source of all happiness. But God is the source of happiness. Even when the happiness that you're enjoying right now, even though you are not in a relationship with him, you're getting the residual effect of God as being the creator of this world. You are enjoying happiness residually from a God that right now you don't know. And you don't recognize that yet.
But here's one scripture I was always told growing up as a kid, that we were created in God's image. Right?
Yes.
And what that was always taught to me as and shown to me was because of that you are like God in that you have the same kind of personality, same kind of qualities and everything built into you.
Yes.
So if that's the case, I'm in God's image like that. I have his qualities, personality traits, I have thoughts that are like God because that's how he made you. So
Originally.
I can do all these things.
Yeah.
I can let, like I said, I can let my kids go and be happy and have fulfilled lives without me. And that's me. And God created me to be like him. So why can't he do the same for us?
He did originally. It says that, the part of the reason why Adam and Eve walked around in the garden and had their own independent lives and didn't always have to be in the presence of God was because God created them in a state where they were able to enjoy and do good and enjoy pleasurable things. The problem is that while he created us in his image, the question is, are we still in his image? And the Bible says that no, all of us are basically dead. We are no longer in the state that we were in. And so you're equating how we live right now with how God originally designed and made it. And those are two different things. When God says he created you in his image, he says he made you like him, but not him. He made you compatible with his perfect essence, meaning you could live perfectly and do all the things that you say you wanted to do, but that he gave you your own identity, which means he gave you a will. And there came a point in your life where you chose to do something that was outside of his will, and now you are no longer in his image. You're in your own image.
The same is true with my kids, though. I have kids. They have my genetic traits and qualities.
Yes.
But they're not me. And
I think I've got it. I've got it. James, if you were perfect right now and you were to let your sons go off and live and do everything that they wanted to do, and they were still in a state of being in essence like you, then they could freely come and go as they please. The problem is if they chose to do something that was outside of your will, James, and you were perfect, now they are incompatible with you. They can't come back and relate to you anymore. Why? Because that which is perfect is incompatible with that which is imperfect.
I'm going to say no to that because if you go back to the whole free will thing, then I'm allowing them to do that. So why shouldn't I welcome them back? If I give them the choice to do what they want to do,
yes,
that means what they do, their will is outside of mine now. So they don't have the same will I do. So that's still not the same thing.
Well, they have the ability to
choose
according to your will at all times.
Yeah, but that's not free will, though, is it? If I give them the choice, here, you can make your own choices, do what you want, and I say, that's up to you. It's not up to me at this point. Now it's on them. So I tell them to do that. They do it. But then why should I punish them for when they exercise that free will and use it?
That's a great question. And I think that's part of the reason why the solution that God did was that he paid the penalty. Because the only way to make that right was for the one who gave the free will and knew that was going to be the path that it would go, that he would pay the price. And he has paid the price. And now it's up to your free will as to whether or not you will say, yes, make that remedy apply to me.
Yeah, but now, so they go out and make a choice that causes harm to them.
Yeah.
And the Bible says that the wages sin pays is death. So, but even still, I'm going to take the sin part out of this, though. Just say they broke the law in some minor way or whatever, and they go to jail for a couple nights or whatever. They paid the price for their mistake. But I wasn't the one who broke the law. I can't go to jail in their place. So
Right.
But
So
I'm still not going to say, hey, you're not my son. I don't welcome you back. And our timing is ending right here.
Just
So
jumping in to say we got just about a minute left in
Yeah.
this little bit, and if you guys had any final points, go ahead and say them, and we'll get to the questions and answers. So
if I can just say that I think that's the whole reason when you see the story of Adam being cast out of the garden is so he couldn't eat of the tree of life. If God had left him in a situation where he could eat of the tree of life, it meant that there was no way that he could die in a way that was not eternal. And therefore God be able to make the provision of mercy and grace available to him in a just way. He actually makes it possible for mankind to be able to receive his grace and mercy by letting us face a temporal death. And now your soul can stand before him and should know that, oh, wait a minute, this sin thing's bad because it's what caused me to be able to die in the first place. I don't want it to be permanent. I want it to be, thank you for letting it just be temporary. And now if I choose the remedy, I don't have to face it ever again. I can't think of a more just, more merciful, more loving, more compassionate way that God could have approached this thing.
Oh, I could have, but our time is up, and we're going to go to the questions and answers.
If you wanted a quick 30
go
to
ahead and say
45
it.
seconds
I'll give
to
it to
wrap
you.
up.
Okay.
Yeah,
please.
please.
Okay. I just didn't want to interfere with the timing too
No,
much.
you guys are good.
But so like, I like hearing this example. If you ever listen to Michael Wiseman on the Bible Says What podcast, he's like, well, why couldn't God have just said, hey, give me some flowers and ask for forgiveness and let me, I'll forgive you. He didn't need to kill himself as a sacrifice to himself to save you from a condition that he gave you. It's like a doctor giving you a sickness just to give you the cure for that sickness. And that's what I'll conclude with on that.
Yeah, and I think with that, definitely, first off, Greg, James, thank you so much for being here. I know I had a really good time. It looks like the live chat was pretty hopping most of it, so it seems like everybody else out there hanging with us was having a good time too. So thank you all for being here as well. Don't forget, like, subscribe. The links for both Greg and James are in the description, so please definitely go check all that stuff out. And then after we're done and wrapped up here, like I said earlier, we'll be hanging out with MathPig and just hanging out and chatting and, doing whatever, I guess. But before that, we do have some questions, and let's see if we can get them. I don't know if MathPig, you're going to get them on the screen or not, but that's okay because I have a few that I can find and read my own. This one looks
James,
like
they're mostly coming my way, probably.
I think they are. Yeah, for sure.
Just to let you know.
We don't want to.
That's
We don't
fine.
want to.
I'm just being honest. I
get the
kind of
hot
know where
seat.
I am.
We don't want to beat up on
You
you
get
too
the hot
much.
seat in this one.
But,
That's okay. That's okay. Hey, I've often told people I actually prefer talking to like Muslims or to atheists more sometimes than Christians because I think actually they help me grow in my faith more than actually when I talk to other people that are Christians because they challenge me in ways that force me to have to think and recognize that I don't know it all and I need to go take a look at things a lot more. So.
well, this first one I think is definitely for you, Greg. From Leophilius, we've got a question for you, Greg. Is something good in virtue of being commanded by God, or does God command things in virtue of their being good?
So is this that? What do they call that thing? The eukaryote or whatever? There's some kind of I know that's not the right word.
Euthyphro, I think.
Euthyphro. Yeah, thank you. That thing is something good because God commanded. It says that it's good, or is it good because of its own? Because God created it as good. I mean, because in some ways that comes down to divine command theory. God, is it because God, whatever God says is the way it is? I don't believe in divine command theory. I think what you do with divine command theory is you basically say that God's a tyrant. That in other words, he can say anything is good, just in order for him to be sovereign. We're going to say he could make anything good. No, the answer is I think that things are good because of their because of their connection to his essence. And his essence is such that he is perfectly righteous in all things righteous and perfectly not unrighteous in all things that are unrighteous. Now I know it's circular logic. How can I prove that? I can't. It's a step of faith on my part that God is who he says he is. But if God is who he says he is, then things are good because they are compatible with his good essence.
Thank you for that, Greg. I think this next one might be again geared towards you, but James, I think you could probably answer too. But from James Apperson, how do we know we aren't getting residual happiness from Eric, the god-eating penguin, or Loki, or SpongeBob?
Well, I mean, that goes back to the question of is there a God? Because essentially, and using all these things, you're basically saying that some imaginary being is actually doing this thing, and is God an imaginary being? And I think that's really the core question: is there really a God, or is there not? We can go into, and probably would have to set up another talk for me to be able to say, hey, here's the reasons why I think there is a God. And someone else would say, here's the reason why I don't think there's a God. In the end, all of us are taking a step of faith. I can't show you God. I think I can show you the effects of God. And I think I can show you the effects of God in my own life. But what you're going to end up having to do is either say, yeah, I believe that, or I don't believe that. I can't take you to a place of no. So
Awesome.
there's going to be a step of faith there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Up next from Electro Live, if God hates sin, why did he create free will agents, since sin is entailed with free will?
Great question. And again, this goes back to why did God create anything with a will of its own? And I thought I think it personally, and this is me, and again, 3 years of thought and checking out the scripture and digging down into it, I think it's that he's compelled, and it's because there was a internal want that God had that became a need, and that need was that there within the praise and worship of created beings, he could actually know himself better, or know himself in a way, or I shouldn't say know, because in his omniscience he knows. He doesn't experientially know unless he actually creates those beings in order for that place to exist where he could actually inhabit. So what you end up with is, why did he create free will beings if he knows sin comes out of it? Is, well, because if not, then he would be left in a place where he would become imperfectly discontent, and he would experience hell. And so what he did was create a way that and devised a plan that makes it so neither he nor any of his created beings that are created to worship him have to go through hell. Awesome. He provided a way of escape for everyone.
Awesome, and thank you for that. And it looks like we've got one final question from MathPig. And if your kids make a choice and then you reject them for that choice, does that not make you a dictator?
Let me see if I'm going to verbalize.
It was a little broken in the question. I'll be honest.
So if your kids make a choice and then you reject them, so you gave them free will, they choose to operate in free will, make a choice that's outside of your will, then aren't you a jerk for actually doing, which I think was one of James's first things when he was talking about Adam and Eve and he created them. The answer is probably, yeah, you'd be a jerk. And the question then becomes, but is God a jerk? And the answer, I believe, is no. In which case you have to look and say, then God, justify why you're not a jerk. And I think the justification is God was in a pickle because of what he knew was going on in terms of what could happen with free will and what happens with his own perfection and the problems that creates. And then he said, but I'm going to create a way out. If he would have just said, I'm going to give you free will, you're going to get stuck in it, and there's no way for you to get a way out, then I think he's a jerk. If he says, hey, I'm going to give you free will. You're going to screw up, but don't worry. I'm going to give you the remedy for it. And it's really simple. You just say, give me the remedy. And I say, yes, here it is. Then I don't think you're a jerk, especially if he actually would suffer. Then I would probably be a jerk if I said, hey, God, I'd rather you suffer so that I don't have to go through this, even though the answer for both of us is that I would end up in a place where I'm at odds with you, but you give me a remedy and that fixes it. And now it's fixed for both of us. I think
So
then we are
isn't he
the
a jerk
jerks.
for giving it to you in the first place, though?
He would be a jerk if he gave it to you and then give you the remedy for it. But he gave
Which
you
is
the
exactly
remedy
what
for
he
it.
did.
No, he gave you the
But he
remedy
gave
for it.
you, but he gave you the problem too.
He gave you the problem because he was in a problem too, but he gave you the remedy for the problem. It'd be like if I said, hey, here's a shirt. You dump this on. Hey, I'm going to give you the free will. You can dump this on your shirt and it's going to ruin your shirt. And I know that you're going to dump it on your shirt and ruin the shirt. But then I give you something else and say, hey, and if you'll throw it in the washing machine and wash it with this, it's going to come out and it's going to look perfect and you're never going to have to worry about this again. That's what God did. He took us through multiple steps. He took us through multiple steps that fixed the problem for both of us. The problem is that we don't want to throw the, we don't want to
mud only to take you to the cleaners.
we sit there and say we're not willing to say, okay, I'll use your remedy. I won't use your washing machine. Why won't I use the washing machine? Because I don't want to. I don't like washing machines, but it's free. You don't have to pay for it. I gave you the detergent. I gave you everything. I just don't want to. That's essentially what we're saying to God.
We'll hold the rest of this for the after party over at MathPigs. But yeah, definitely we appreciate you both. Before I do the kind of whole wrap up and end it all stuff, I wanna give you both a minute to 2 minutes if you had any final points or just some nice things you wanted to say. We always love that stuff. Oh wait.
Frustrated.
It looks like we might have one more. Christians have a way to account for morality. How does secular Rarity account for his? Well, the good news is I'm the moderator, so I am not required to answer those questions because I'm not one of the debaters. But frustrated atheists, you can come over and hang out at MathPig for the after party because I will be there and we will be chatting it up and rolling in the mud is what I hear. So, but let me just throw it back over to our awesome debaters. Once again, y'all, their links are in the description. Please go check them out. And we'll since we've started the whole thing, we'll just keep it running as we've had it. Greg, I'll give you 2 minutes, and then James, I'll give you 2 final minutes as well, and then we'll wrap it up and go hang out in the mud.
Very good. I guess just in the 2 minutes, I guess it's a shameful plug, but I raised it this book. It's a book that I wrote. It actually contains the 3 years of thought where I actually thought about the question, why would an omniscient God who's perfect in every way create anything that has a will of its own? When he knows that those things that he creates that have a will of their own are actually going to rebel against him. How can he do that and how? So it's a fictional story. I do it that way because a lot of people don't like to read theology and don't want to read 200 pages of it for sure. But it actually walks you through and shows you an answer to that. So anyway, and I'm happy to talk about it in the after party as well.
Thank you so much, Greg. James?
Great conversation, Greg. Appreciate it. Really do.
Thank you, James. I didn't mention that in mine. Thank you.
I thought we had a really respectful and good banter back and forth, even though we have very differing viewpoints on the subject. Mm-hmm. In conclusion, just basically from what I've said, from what I read in the Bible and everything, and from my own deconversion, I just cannot see how somebody who gives you the disease and then gives you the cure could be called good. In the medical world, we would call that malpractice, and you'd be liable for a lawsuit and losing your license and losing everything you have. And I think that if this truly is what God did and everything, he needs to be held accountable for his actions and for inflicting all this pain and suffering on humanity for all these thousands upon thousands of years. And that's where I'll end it.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both for being here. Thank you everybody who's been hanging out with us in the live chat, and anybody watching this in the future. We really appreciate that. Please just take a moment, like, subscribe, hit the bell, and just share the channel, because we'd love to keep it going. We'd love to, have it grow and put on these types of, good conversations more and more regularly. So definitely, please, simple things you can do. That being said, reminder, go check out the links in the description for both Greg and James. You can find all of their great stuff. And then the link for the after party over at MathPig's channel is in the link in the description, as well as the chat. But yeah, seriously, thank you everyone for hanging out with us today. We really greatly appreciate it. And since I didn't have anything prepared, I would just say, Wes, MathPig, that's it for me, and take us out, I guess.